knowing how to lead after an employee's death is about a company's bottom line. Hi, welcome to Workplacegrief, where we talk about grief in the workplace and how leaders, HR, and employees can learn how to manage death at work better. So today's title is Employee Death, 3 Common Mistakes to Avoid as a Leader. Today, we'll discuss the 3 common mistakes that leaders should avoid when managing a grieving team. Unfortunately, when it comes to employee death, leaders make many mistakes, and it's not your fault or their fault, because how to manage a grieving team after loss is not an MBA course, nor is it something that most managers think about. But employees die. They die on the job, they die on their way to the job, they die heading home from the job, they die over the weekend between the job. And if a leader doesn't know what to expect or what to do, they can make common and avoidable mistakes that can cost them their ability to lead effectively, not just during the crisis, but in the future. And in addition, these mistakes cost organizations millions of dollars due to mental wellness issues, retention, and productivity. So knowing how to lead after an employee's death is about a company's bottom line, not just about feeling good. My name is Kim Hamer, and I am a grief at work expert. I share important tools with leaders, HR, employees who are dealing with loss of a team member. I'm also founder of Workplacegrief, where we are currently developing software that combines humans and AI to help organizations manage death more effectively at work. All right, so leaders don't make these 3 mistakes out of cruelty. They make them because they simply just don't know. Most leaders don't know the nature of grief and its major impact on a team, what to expect or not to expect from a grieving team, common red flags and how to manage them. So, and even how to manage their own grief with their work demands. And in this case, what a leader doesn't know can really affect employees and productivity for years to come. As an HR professional, I know how impactful loss can be on an organization. So before we get going, please make sure you like and subscribe with this video. And please also make sure you share it with your HR team or your colleagues, because look, we all need a little help with death, especially when it comes to the workplace. All right, so back to the mistakes. These are not the only common mistakes that HR and leaders make, but they are the ones that cause a leader a lot of grief, excuse the expression, and unnecessary frustration in the early months after an employee dies. So before I tell you what all these 3 are, if you are currently dealing with employee loss or have in the past, and you're going through this video and you realize that you've made these mistakes, please don't feel guilty. This information, unfortunately, is not common knowledge. And although my goal is to make it common knowledge for millions of companies worldwide, I'm not there yet. So there's a lot of information on experts on dealing with your grief, right? With their own grief, like many EAPs do a decent job with that. But when it comes to managing grieving teams or employees after they have had a significant loss, there's very little information. So if you are that leader trying to manage a grieving team right now, please, it's okay. You did a great job. You did the best you could. And I'm really glad you're here. And hopefully after this video, you'll be able to do a little bit better. All right. So the number 1 mistake that leaders make after an employee dies is to assume that the team is okay because there are no signs of grieving. Now here, I want to ask you, what are signs of a grieving person, right? We picture crying and sadness, but what does sadness look like at work? What do you see? And when you think about it, what are signs of joy and happiness? Are people who are happy always smiling at work? What does contentment look like at work? And I think you can see where I'm going with this. What's happening is that we expect emotions to be shown outside. And with grief and a whole bunch of them, that's just not the case. And when we narrow our view to thinking that someone needs to show outward signs of grief, then we don't consider the fact that people are still grieving, because grief is an inside job, as are most emotions. So just because your team isn't looking like they're grieving doesn't mean that they're not grieving. I want to give you an example. A great example of an invisible sign of a team member who's grieving, it's they start missing deadlines. So leaders need to be aware of the many characteristics of a grieving team so that they can know how to handle them. And I promise I will share those in an upcoming video. All right, the second common mistake that leaders make is not doing weekly grief check-ins at all, or dropping them after the first couple weeks after loss. Now, this ties into number one. If you're looking for signs of grieving person and you don't see them, then you don't feel like you need to do these grief check-ins because it feels like they're unnecessary. Now, you're probably asking, Kim, what's a grief check-in? A grief check-in is where you take a moment during the day, during a meeting, during your already scheduled one-on-ones to check in with your employee to see how they are managing their grief. Now, these check-ins are not about you being your employee's therapist and helping them work through it. They are a way for you to check in on their grief process without being too intrusive, as well as to normalize the grief experience on your team. Now, I know the idea of setting up a weekly one-on-one to talk about grief can feel a little uncomfortable, and it totally makes sense. But that's where we have you covered. We provide our clients with these short, natural-sounding scripts to help them have these conversations, and we also provide them with what to do next steps, so you're never alone in this. And the thing I really like about the scripts, they've had positive effects on the team, particularly in increasing retention. Okay, so the third reason, the third common mistake is that leaders think that grief sort of just ends. Now, I was dating a guy who I gave him a book about how to date a widow, and I'm a widow. And after he read it, I asked him, what did he learn the most from it? And he said that grief doesn't end. And I, of course, was shocked by this because I've been a widow for 15 years, and I'm very aware that grief doesn't end. But he had not suffered a major loss in his life. And so how on earth would he know? And so when I think about to my life before my husband died, I assumed that grief would end, especially after the first year. So I'm here to tell you that that assumption is incorrect. Your team is grieving, and depending on their past experience and their relationship with the deceased team member, their grief is not going to end. It will definitely lessen and not be as intense, but it doesn't end. So some of your team will be dealing with grief for months later. And it's why I always recommend that organizations help teams mark milestones after loss. It could be like a 6 month after the person died. It signals a basic understanding of the grief process, and it shows employees that what they are matters more than what they contribute to the organization. So to wrap up today's video, you've learned that grief is not just gone because you can't see it. You've learned the importance of doing these grief check-ins with your team, and you learned that grief is never really over. Now, I have a question for you. If there's a topic around employee death that you'd like to learn about, leave me a comment below or reach out to me on LinkedIn and IG. I think the links are like in the header above. I mean, I would be really honored to help. And of course, make sure you please like, subscribe, and comment. Like, did you think this was helpful or did you think this was crap? Either way, I'd love to know, so make sure you make a comment. But lastly, I really want you to remember that you matter. What you do really matters. Thanks for showing up today. All right, y'all, make it a great day.